Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lenfest Center for the Arts at Columbia University. I'm Sarah Cole. I'm the Dean of the School of the Arts, and I am so happy to see you all here. And thank you for coming and for joining us for the first event of our series this year. Our event series, Columbia University School of the Arts Presents, really creative, I know, has a fantastic lineup of artists to come, so please peruse our website and look out for emails about all kinds of wonderful events and programs. Tonight, we're here to celebrate the book American Diva, Extraordinary, Unruly, Fabulous by our beloved colleague, herself most definitely extraordinary, unruly, and fabulous, Professor Deborah Paredez. And I'm thrilled to be able to be here to introduce this event. I'd like to take a moment to recognize that Columbia University and the School of the Arts sit on the ancestral homeland of the Lenni Lenape and Wappinger people. At the School of the Arts, we believe that education and the arts are critical spaces to address issues of exclusion, erasure, and systemic discrimination. And our speakers tonight are people who espouse those values deeply in their work. A few thank yous. First, to our co-presenters, the Society of Fellows and Heyman Center for the Humanities, and to University Life. Thank you to Book Culture for being here with books, and after the program tonight, you can come and buy books and have them signed, and I actually believe both of our speakers have books on hand, so that's definitely recommended to buy those books. Couple more people to thank. First of all, Gavin Browning, who is right there. Thank you to Gavin for his wonderful and warm and truly loving organizing of this event and all the events that he helps us to produce here, and to Lauren Weigel and her exceptional staff here at the Lenfest Center. So, we have an inspiring pair of writers speaking to us tonight. Let me begin with Margo Jefferson, who's professor of professional practice here at Columbia University School of the Arts in the writing program. She is a Pulitzer Prize-winning critic and a 2022 recipient of the Wyndham Campbell Prize for Nonfiction. Professor Jefferson has published 3 books: Constructing a Nervous System, a memoir; Negroland, a memoir; and On Michael Jackson. And I think there's a new one coming. Negroland won, this is what was said to me, but I think we're actually missing one here. Negroland won the 2015 National Books Critics Circle Award for Autobiography, the International Bridge Prize, the Heartland Prize, and it was shortlisted for the Bailey Clifford Prize. Beyond these books, many of you will know Professor Jefferson's writing very well, since she has been an important art critic for the New York Times and Newsweek. She's published in the New York Magazine, The Nation, The Washington Post, The Believer, Guernica Book Forum, and Vogue, among other places. Her essays have been anthologized in too many prestigious places to list here. I'm so happy that she'll be speaking with Professor Paredez about her new book. And I feel like I need to move now to first names. So I'm so happy that she'll be speaking with Deborah about her new book. Deborah Paredez is chair and associate professor at the School of the Arts in the Writing Program, and also in the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race here at Columbia. She's the author of 4 books: the scholarly study Selenidad, Selena, Latinos, and the Performance of Memory. 2 poetry collections, This Side of Skin and Year of the Dog, winner of the 2020 Writers League of Texas Poetry Award and a New York Times New and Notable Book of that year. And most recently, the book we are here to celebrate tonight, American Diva, out by Norton this year. Her poetry and essays have appeared in the New York Times, Los Angeles Review of Books, the Boston Review, Poetry, and elsewhere. In addition to all of this, she's the co-founder of Canto Mundo, the first ever national organization dedicated to Latinx poetry and poets. Professor Paredez, I said I was going to call her Deborah, but I'm still calling her Professor Paredez. Her work is sublime and important in so many ways. With her poetry, the urgency of her work is everywhere apparent, as it weaves together major historical events and experiences that have left legacies of trauma, injury, and profoundly contested memory on generations, weaving those together with the lives of real, fictional, and mythical people, many of them women. Her approach to the past and to the lives of those who have been written out of history and or victimized in and by their worlds is stunning and raw, even as it collects in its spaces the relics of thousands of years of writing and art. In her scholarly work on Latinx popular culture, she has an astonishing eye and ear for her subjects. She is theoretically rigorous while also charming and full of wit. And she loves her subjects. That really comes through in a writing practice that is exuberant and passionate. I think you will hear all of this as we hear from her about her new book and from her new book, American Diva, which brings Professor Paredez into the terrains of popular culture, music, celebrity, personal and communal memory, and so much more. You will hear her wonderful voice, rich, dynamic individual. And maybe you will get a sense of something else about Deborah, what a wonderful person she is. I'm so proud to have her as a colleague and a friend, and I'm immensely looking forward to hearing her, along with the fantastic Margo Jefferson, discuss this great new book. So please welcome them up to the front.
Good evening, everyone. It's so great to see all of your beautiful faces. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Sarah, for that beautiful introduction. Thank you to everyone who helped organize this event. I'm very, very happy. And thank you especially to Margo for engaging in this conversation and really for doing all of the writing for the many years before this that really helped me learn how to do the kind of work I was trying to do here. So thank you. I'm going to read a few sections from various parts in the book for about 10 to 12 minutes. And because there's a lot of photos in the book, I thought I'd share some of those as well as I read. So here we go. I was born the year Grace Jones moved to Paris. It was not long after she had shaved her head for the first time and began to shape what would become her signature Afro-alien androgynous look. It made me look hard in a soft world, Jones recalls. When she released her second studio album, Fame, in 1978, she celebrated its release and her 30th birthday with fellow divas Divine and Nona Hendrix and a nightclub full of friends and fans at the Xenon Disco. At one point, during that dazzlingly hedonistic night, Jones, dressed as the Egyptian queen Nefertiti, straddled a motorcycle, along with Hendrix and a dog-collared dancer sandwiched between them, while extending her hand down to feed birthday cake to Divine, who was stretched out on the floor, mouth opened wide. Jones would later recall this particular scene as a frenzied fantasy world I felt very at home in. The photos from the party pulse with the sybaritic splendor of bodies pressed ass to pelvis, breast to back, thigh to thigh, taking turns atop the bike while Divine stretches out on a bed of crushed carnations. So much glint and gleam. Rosy hues streaked across each tableau, all the bodies glistening and so fully inhabited. In one shot, they're holding wedges of cake. In another, they're licking the icing off their fingers. In one frame, a dancer's arm is hooked under Hendrix's leg. In another, Jones stretches her arms in a wide V, exposing the small patch of hair in her armpit. So much deliriously exposed. A dancer's tan line, the inseam of Hendrix's bodysuit, the hair on the toes of another dancer's bare feet, Divine's panties and a splash of sweat on her snarling face, Jones's shaved thigh, as hard and slick as a strip of onyx. The scenes are all palm and crotch and mouth, and wait, whose arm is that? Every part of every body open and hungry for more and more. The exhilarating polymorphous perversity of it all. A diva teaches us how to indulge our wildest appetites, how to prostrate ourselves to our wants and demand they be met. She revs the engine of her desires and invites us all along for the ride. Her transgressions and her risk-taking and her outrageous excess lead her and those of us who dance to her music or dive into the roiling depths of her voice toward pleasure and more pleasure. Shaving my head led directly to my first orgasm, Jones declares. The diva insists on pleasure as a way of knowing and enduring. She offers lessons about the reparative work of feeling good for bodies that have historically been marked by suffering or shame. I was preaching pleasure as a certain sort of threat, Jones declares. Pleasure as a threat to those who would rather we lie prostrate to our pain or before the altar of ordinariness. And threat as an inherent dimension to pleasure, threat to the status quo, to the borders that have been erected to divide us from one another and from our own radiant wants. Lucia was my first. Tia Lucia Virginia Martinez Bustillo. Seems like a lot of folks of color I know have one, that influential auntie or tia who dwells on the margins of the family, of propriety even, and who models an adamantly singular and deliciously adorned life. Grace Jones speaks of the delightful naughtiness of her Aunt Sybil, who showed her how you could put on makeup without it causing a catastrophe. Auntie divas or proto-prima donnas who taught us to step out in style or to step out of line, who took our hand and guided it as we held the eyeliner. Tias who assured us that everything was going to be all right, or not, and who helped us craft our own sense of style as armor against the inevitable assaults. Tias who taught us how to cantilever ourselves across catastrophe, who introduced us to opera, or, in my case, oysters, who taught us not to fear the flesh, but make an art out of accessorizing it. Tia Lucia couldn't carry a tune or dance on point, but she could carry something off. Cat-eye sunglasses, clip-on earrings the size of saucers, a Christmas sweater, unironically, someone else's money. Style was for her not simply an expression of self-possession, but of self-preservation. Tia, like all divas, was always game for life, never afraid of the big gamble, at ease with winning big and undeterred by big losses. Her letters regularly chronicled in detail her wins and losses. $50 on the horse races. I won 6 times last night. She styled herself to be unconstrained by the hard realities of life. She would regularly make her own reality, guided as she was by the rules of chance and dreams and fantasy and all that is fabulous. But her way was not simply frivolous. Above all, she refused to concede dignity amidst life's onslaught of indignities. I sure won a lot, she once wrote. I'll be able to put in my phone again real soon. Not long after her phone got reinstalled, she called me to tell me she had lost her car. I failed at first to understand fully what had happened. Where did you last park it? No, Debbie, I lost it to the slots. A diva like Tia risks it all, and she does it all out in public. The spectacle of her suffering is evidence of her perseverance. And sometimes those of us who love her most bear the cost of her risky business. Once, Tia offered to help me sell a box of candy bars for my drama club fundraiser. I never saw the candy or the cash again. She carried off with it, and then she carried on as usual, because the diva's unrepentant. Sometimes she leaves you in a bind, or in debt, or in a state of awe that is equal parts rapture and resentment. And why shouldn't she be when caprice is her craft? A diva like Tia teaches us how to love women who are simultaneously grand and imperfect, how to hold admiration and indignation, how to insist on your gloriously messy brown self when the world never will. She rides the bus to Vegas and back when the car's been repossessed, and she does it all in an impeccably broached and buttoned black wool coat, her signature style, as easy and alarming as taking candy from a baby. The Texas mountain laurel blossoms that perfume the air every March are beginning, like ruffled ingenues, to wither in the heat. It's late spring of 1988, and I'm a junior in high school who's managed to stay out late enough to head over to Jamie's house when the party's just getting started. Jamie's a year older, and fresh-faced and preppy-pressed and gay and a freak like the rest of us. He wears blazers and belts his jeans, his thick hair parted to the side and falling just long enough to brush his eyelashes. He's artfully composed. I can't remember if he was in the closet because when he was with us, the drama kids, he was himself. Jamie's parents are out of town again, and he's set out the usual array of Jell-O shots and weed and wine coolers and cheap tequila. I am sober and still a virgin, and sunken into the sofa as a VHS of John Waters' 1972 cult film, Pink Flamingos, plays on the television screen. It's the final scene. Divine, sitting on the pavement, eating dog shit, in a trashed-up bouffant coif shaved to the ear line, eyebrows arched into a sinister V. She swallows and sneers, and I feel my insides turn out. The only way I can think to describe how I felt is to say, as we do in Chicana Spanish, me da asco, which translates roughly to it disgusts me or it makes me nauseous. But asco is more than that. To experience asco is to surrender to an entanglement with the abject and the particular illuminations and transformations such an encounter provokes. I watch Divine eat the shit, and I open my mouth. What is that? Is all I can ask. Watching is all I can do. Watching the way we watch bodies pulled from mangled cars. The way, years later, I will watch as my friend Regina Jean pushes the baby out while I hold her trembling thigh, startled at how much blood and shit is involved in our acts of becoming. Divine was the diva that delivered me over to my body, revealed my own sullied underside. Divine was the beast who ate the beauty and then shat her out, monstrous and abundant, her utterly, terribly human body awakening me to the miracle and filth of my very living, awakening me as well to our shared, inevitable, and already underway decay. The shadow cast by her mythic presence was the shadow of my own mortality and of all the craven ways I wanted to live. The first time I saw Divine at Jamie's house, me da asco, and I felt exhilarated, and I knew there was no going back. The mountain laurel blossoms succumbed to the heat. Divas can turn our insides out. They live out loud what our true selves are like on the inside, selves we may not yet be able to fully realize, or that are simply too threatened by the world to live on the outside. Divine ate the dog shit, and I was never the same. The autumn came, and the mountain laurel blossoms turned to darkened felt pods, filled with the poisonous beans, the color of blood, that few potential predators will touch. Divas touch the most sullied place in us, invite us to touch it in ourselves, to touch it in one another, to touch the other. Divas say, live in your sickness, live in your wounds, live in your most base desires, even if it might kill you. Live. Thank you.
Yes. Hello. Okay.
Hello. Oh, that was glorious.
Thank you.
Yes, 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 yes. Hmm. How does one transition from that into a discussion? Yes, yes, yes. Um, it's some among the things I love about this book, that each of these pieces, gave us was this. The combination of the utter singularity of the diva and this vast landscape that she is on, peopled with, but not peopled only with others, like the Grace Jones scene, but peopled with desires, with longings, with fantasies. So the outside and the inside, which is one of, I love the way you do your word plays. The turning the outside inside out and then living on the outside, those are all being enacted in your prose, which is quite wonderful. You are, I don't think you're divas. We think so often, among the many wrong things we think about divas, of their selfishness, even when it's glorious. But it's always being shared, their gifts, isn't it? There's always a mass of fantasies and longings they're setting loose in us, of actions that we're giving back to them, we're imitating. And there is a kind of imaginative generosity that I think the sense of the diva as the great female artist tends to exclude, because of course she must be something of a narcissist. And even the narcissism in your book turns into a kind of improvisational bounty that we can then, the candy from the baby. She's always giving you material to work with. Yeah, right. A couple of things, many things I want to note, but let me get my material. You have a prologue and an epilogue, and your prologue is Vicky Carr, who was born Florencia. Do you remember? It's like four.
De Casillas, it's very long. Mexican name.
Exactly. She begins by introducing us to a Latina diva who is passing as a Nordic, right? And who loses, as many did, who loses her chance at commercial dividend to Barbra Streisand, who was rising at the same time. But what you do, I love that you start with what is less familiar. You could have begun with, one of the canonized divas. You write about Aretha, you write about Tina. I love that because it gives us a kind of level playing field for the imagination. And it allows you as a writer to create, to make a song out of the voice that, unless we're reaching for it while reading, the voice that we don't know yet, you create it for us. So you are stepping on the stage with her and behind her. But one of the things that struck me particularly is the way she begins this intricate and yet very organic linking of one chapter to the next, and of one diva's life to the next, and of you as a child, you as an adult, your mother, your great aunt, your daughter. They're all there. But what you do, let me give you a very specific example of as a writer, one of the things I love so much. First of all, you do have your own form of synesthesia, because you start, the sound of a diva's voice was how I knew we were Mexican, or at least how I knew I couldn't hide it from the neighbors. So sight and sound are already mingling there. But you end by creating, in Spanish, the last lines of Vicky Florencia's song, and you start a series of verbs that have to do with, listen again with me now. She starts invoking us as attendants, as watchers, and inviting us in. Listen again with me now. I'm at long last able to translate the lyrics. Can you hear Carr sing about waiting for her lover's return? Let's listen again. Can you hear it? Can you see it? I find myself lingering on that line, on that light, and I am overcome by a sense of synesthesia. I blink dumbly at the illumination emanating from the sound of her voice. The illumination emanating from the sound of her voice. She keeps singing, and her voice is the illuminated path. All I need to do is follow her. Now, listen to the start of the next chapter, which is actually chapter 1, from which the Grace Jones excerpt came. I was born the year thousands of women marched down Fifth Avenue and rallied in Bryant Park for the 1970 Women's Strike for Equality. The year that further uptown, Iris Morales joined other young Nuyorican freedom fighters to form the Women's Caucus in the New York chapter of the Young Lords Party. It was the year that Nina Simone released the civil rights anthem, To Be Young, Gifted in Black, inspired by Lorraine Hansberry's autobiographical play. The year Angela Davis was captured by the FBI in New York and extradited to California to await trial in the Marin County jail cell. I was born during her imprisonment. It was the year Vicky Carr, with her silky contralto, sprung from the borderlands roots, was named Woman of the Year. So yes, you do come back to Vicky, but what I love is all I need to do is follow her. And then you and she are following the marchers down Fifth Avenue and following Angela Davis. And it's wonderful. Yeah. And cinematic in the speed with which you move. A couple of other examples of that. Help me find my page. In the Grace Jones chapter after that, and the Grace Jones chapter, after that ecstatic party, the Grace Jones chapter ends with a sudden turn to immortality and death, and we end with Grace gets deep and philosophical.
Her memoir is amazing, actually.
I need to read that. Yes. Okay. And at the top of the page that's your daughter. Is this little daughter gesturing away wildly as Grace muses on death and eternal life. Because Grace Jones, age 75, good God, how could it be, continues to hula hoop in a leotard and body paint on stage in front of her legions of adoring fans. Because a diva never retires. As Jones reminds us, when I retire, I'm dead, and even then I will be reincarnated. I will remain on the move, even with that hard shaved thigh, right? Even death won't stop me, it never has. And then we move into your great aunt, whom we know we will lose, and that you will lose. And so we take those Grace Jones words through the book to bring them to every scene that Aunt Lucia appears in. So you were always coding in these memories, these associations, these resonances.
It's so funny. Thank you for picking up on all that. The transitions, I really was,
I've been
working hard on that. So thank you for tending to that. It's always a writer's dream to have someone pay that close attention. When I was working on the book, one of my people who was helping me was Saidia Hartman, and Saidia's like, yeah, you know what? You're just all about divas and death. That's kind of like your thing. But there is something about the fact that divas do help us, I think, become acquainted with death in a very particular way, right? Whether it's the way I was talking about Divine, or the very fact that they all die at the end of the opera, right? And so that there's this relationship between divas and mortality.
And the epilogue, we begin with the prologue for Vicky Carr. The epilogue is actually, you're at a performance of Lucia de Lammermoor.
Exactly.
I go mad and I die.
Yes, that's right. I go mad. But that, I wanted there to be the kind of gesturing toward that, at the beginning, and that it kind of accumulates so that by the time we end, we're not only in the kind of temporally in the time of COVID, but then also about the loss of, the aunt and the kind of diva in her last moments. And so I
And even
think
with
that's-
Vicky, the loss is
Yeah.
her Latinx.
Of course, absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. I think that I wanted to right away establish the relation. As you say, divas are absolutely singular, right? In all of the ways we think of them, they're singular in their virtuosity. They don't play well with others. All those things are absolutely true. But I think what was really important for me to show in the book, which is that they also, just as much as they are singular, facilitate deep relations.
Exactly.
This is a book about my diva relations, right?
That's
Not just my
right.
relationship with them, but the relationships that they facilitate. Many people have written about this, but I wanted to enact that, and I wanted to enact it in relation
Well, I think
to-
it's the enactment as
Yeah.
opposed to just writing about it. For when you take divine, and this gross act, which then moves into
Yeah.
you're helping your friend
Yeah.
deliver her baby, and we go, oh,
That's all there.
yeah, exactly. Oh, I see. Indeed. I want to ask. I keep saying I wanted to ask. You put now there are 10 chapters in this book, prologue and epilogue, and let me just quickly give the audience a sense of an order, so you'll know why I'm going to ask the next question. There's Me and Mrs. Grace Jones. Do any of you remember that song, Me and Mrs. Jones? Yeah. Deb
I'm
loves her
clearly
games. I love them
generationally
too.
positioning myself.
Then there's Diva Style, which is Tia Lucia, Prima Prima. Then there's Diva Movidas, Diva Moves, which is, well, it's actually your great aunt and your mother going to the movies and leading us into Anita, the great character in West Side Story, and Rita Moreno, who embodies her in the movie of West Side Story. Then comes Diva Monstrosity. And after that, you move into Aretha Franklin, Serena and Venus, Celia Cruz and La India. And then LaBelle, the kind of the group triumph. The girl group turned into goddesses and and creators of universes. None of that little taught choreography and hierarchy anymore. No. Why did you put what is in some ways the riskiest, meaning it risks repelling, as it repelled you. It's the hardest, funkiest material. Why did you put that exactly in the center?
You got that, huh? So, I wanted, because it's so clear in the book that I am unabashedly in adoration of divas, right? Throughout the book, I am very much, sort of laying prostrate at the altar of divas. But I wanted there to be at the heart of it, not just the kind of shadow of death throughout, but I wanted there to be at the heart of it also the reckoning with the sublime, the monstrous, the mortality. That chapter is also about death in different ways. I don't want to give it away, but and it's about really how do you reckon with embodiment? And sometimes that's it's watching a diva do things extraordinary with the body, right? Watching Serena do a backhand, or watching Rita Moreno kick until it's hitting the stars. But sometimes it's about the scatological, and I wanted that to be there so that I was also reckoning with those parts that are difficult to reckon with, or even the chapter that's also kind of in the middle, which is what the diva the sort of Diva's ink, the diva branding that happens.
Yes, that's going to be the next.
In the 90s, yeah. So that's part of why that's in the center. And chronologically in my life, it kind of worked out that way.
You are becoming an adult. Yeah, absolutely. But it's, stop, pause, and now we'll go on. It is also true that right after that, as you just mentioned, you move into, there are more divas. There's Celia Cruz, La India, there are Venus and Serena, there is Aretha and the rest. These poor divas who got lost in Aretha's shadow. But, now wait, where was I going with that? Yes, you start reckoning as, a stern in your own way, charming but stern culture critic with the manipulation, the commodification, the uses, the mythologizing in a capitalist commercial way of what diva, how we can market divas, how we can market them for young girls, often young white girls, how we can market them for women in terms of you can be successful, you can be impressive in the world. Now, don't think about anything else, okay? In terms of a kind of high achieving shallowness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, would you talk a little more about that? Because I love that you come to terms with it. You know, that's all right. Here's my severe side. Don't.
Yeah.
No, don't take this lightly.
Right.
Yeah, because a lot is required. You have to go against a lot to preserve and keep creating and generating those diva worlds that you love.
Yeah.
They are all thwarting those.
Writing that chapter about the 90s, I think, was the hardest for me to put together, in part because, in the 1990s, there's this huge proliferation. Like the word, if you do like a word search, like a Google Ngram, or if you do like those New York Times, word, assessments of the usages of words, there's like a 400% increase of the use of the word diva in popular culture in the 1990s, right? And it's stunning. And so, of course, the researcher in me was like, what does this mean? What are we talking about when we say this word? What are we not talking about? And of course, it's coinciding with kind of the rise of post-feminism, right? This kind of simultaneous embrace and disavowal of feminism.
Yes,
It's like Carrie Bradshaw's traipsing around, doing her thing. And it very much then diva becomes this way of like saying but not saying, embracing but repudiating feminism or any kind of women in power. And then it's like the rise of neoliberalism. We have Clinton, right? Clinton's doing all his neoliberal disastrous stuff. And so neoliberal kind of, post-feminist stuff all kind of consolidate around this term is what I eventually figured out. And so to me, it was, if like you track the usage of that word, you can actually track the way these processes are kind of being applied and how divas are being hailed. And the thing I talk about with Aretha and the rest is the very then famous VH1 Divas Live concerts, and the very first one. And the reason they actually start is because they are used to raise money to fund music in schools. And why do we need to fund music in schools through the private sphere? Because Clinton has gutted music programs, And so on this show, divas are kind of hailed to come in and save the music, literally save the music, when in fact, and Clinton's up there going like, yay for VH1, saving the music. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Really? But divas are kind of called in to do this work that the state can't, is refusing to do now. So they play this role, in becoming a kind of, symbols of neoliberalism and being brands.
And stepping on stage and just turn it on.
Yeah, and turn it
that
on.
machine on.
Exactly.
And my high notes. Yes.
The high notes. And all that's true, right? But because I'm a performance scholar, what is also true is that Aretha's still Aretha, and she's in that performance is like, yeah, this is the script, but I'm not going to fully follow it. And so they also teach us how to like not do what we're hailed to do, even as we're called to do it.
Yes,
and I think that's what's exciting, right? So why no one can kind of catch her, but perhaps the foam of her wake, maybe. But that's part of what I also wanted to show in that chapter, ultimately.
Yeah, and you did, and that is that Aretha still has access to, as the performer, she is a kind of zone of spiritual exaltation, intensity. But you also showed Aretha, it's like the secular and the spiritual. I can do both if I'm Aretha or it's, Sam Cooke or Otis Redding. You describe her coming in, I think it's the Kennedy Center Awards, if I got it right, and she is going to sing. Carole King is getting a Kennedy Center Award, and Aretha is going to sing. Which one? How You Make Me Feel. What else is she going to sing? Like a natural woman. And you chronicle, if you would now, the way she enters.
Absolutely.
This combination of homage and superiority.
Oh, absolutely. And as my students in the Divas class could certainly tell you, because that's how I start the class every time, is with this clip of her performing, because it is in some ways the perfect example of showing what a diva can do, right? So she walks in, She puts her clutch on the piano. You know, she has her coat on still, full-length fur.
Her
And she
maid,
sits at the piano, and then she just plays the hell out of the song. And then in the middle of the song, she stands, and she's being Aretha. She's hitting every note. She's taking up the space. Her backup singers are actually downstage and looking at her. So, you know, everybody's instructed, like they know where to look. And then she lets the coat fall, of course, when she sort of, you know, makes. And Carole King is in the back, like cheering her on, and you know, everybody's crying.
Carole King has turned into a total fan, right?
Girl.
She's
Everybody's,
ostensibly getting the award.
doing this. But you know, so much of that moment is about, you know, one, you know, the appearance of effortlessness, right? I'm just getting out of the car and throwing my clutch down, and the clear amassing, like accretion of, like, you know, decades of disciplining of the body to be able to do that.
Exactly.
And a diva never covers a song. She takes it. It's hers.
That's right.
That song is never Carole King's again. You know, it's always Aretha's.
That's
so
right.
I think that idea of seizing what isn't given you, you know, the understanding that some, like especially for women of color, right? Like, I'm not going to be ceded things, so I will seize it. And being able to model that, I think, is really exciting for some of us.
I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Which then leads us to let's see. How should we put it? The
girls?
the stealing the material that they had stolen from the West Side Story, white male creators, and the way you describe Rita Moreno's way of dancing, which exceeds and presses against the very deft and you know, well composed borders and boundaries of the song. She has to use her body in Jerome Robbins' ostensible choreography, it is, to create an additional text. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I'm deeply indebted to both, like, dance scholars and performance scholars who've, you know, taught me how to retrieve so many things in a performance that you might not otherwise notice. But I'm also deeply indebted to my mom for, like, teaching me how to watch, like, how to find something in that musical, right? When as Latinos, you know, mostly we're supposed to hate it, which, of course, for very good reason. So I started that chapter years ago with the question of, like, why am I still drawn to West Side Story? Like, I'm not supposed to like this. Like, why do I? You know, it's not just because I'm colonized. Like, yes, we all work hard to decolonize our minds. You know, it's a daily chore. But, like, it's not just, can't be just explained away as that. I want to explain it. And so part of what I discovered was, you know, she is dancing beyond the bounds, right? And she's singing a song about assimilation, but her body is never assimilating fully. Her character is never assimilating fully. In a musical that's all about belonging, she's singular. Like, what does that mean to stand apart in a musical that's all about tribe and turf? And you know, and also just simply in the logics of a musical, like, the person who dances the best and has the best costume is the one that's like the real protagonist, right? And this is who she was, right? So I talk a lot about what it means to exceed the boundaries of that particular narrative and what that means for Latinos in our relationship to citizenship.
Exactly. And I wanted to read two passages, but clearly fate is, that I've outlined, but underlined, but clearly fate is saying to me, read one. But this is going to lead right back to your talking more about this. Well, actually, yes, you're talking more about it. There is something so brown in the way Anita moves, and not just because she can dance the mambo or the paso doble, or because it's the only role in the musical's long production history that's often cast with any actual Latin diva. Wasn't George Chakiris Greek?
He was Greek.
He was Greek. Okay.
He is still alive. Yeah.
I'm sorry, isn't George Chakiris? No, we don't end people performing lives before fate does. What feels so brown, I'm going to emphasize that, about the way Anita moves, is the way she moves in relation to others, at once distinct and simultaneously synchronized to the rhythms of those with whom she seeks community. A sense of being singular, plural, that scholar Jose E. Muñez once described as a key and queer feature of feeling brown. We have many races inhabiting this book, several genders, several races, many modes of difference. How you address and invoke being brown is very interesting because it could become a tension point.
Oh, absolutely.
And it doesn't. So would you talk more about the particulars of it? You give it texture as well as a kind of social and historical presence.
Yeah, I mean, it was very important for me to really engage very directly and with as much nuance as possible with just race and the constructions of race and sexuality that divas always, encourage us to do. And brownness in particular is tricky, right? Because brownness is something that people like Jose Munoz have theorized, but also, it can work to certainly racialize someone, right? But it also can work in the service of anti-blackness, right? Because it is always, it is not black, and if we think, for example, about one of the chapters I had to cut was about Lena Horne, and the way that she was positioned in her career, right? As like the exotic mulatta who's, so she's the exotic, right, which is about brownness, not blackness. Right? No. And so I wanted to reckon with how brownness can function both as a way, as a position that is in fact racialized, especially in relation to the state, right, always seen as outside of the boundaries of state citizenship, but also as something that could work against blackness, right, to unify that. And so, I wanted to get at that. And there is something about the way, to me, Rita dances as Anita that did seem very, I talk about, brown or Latino in relation to the way we do citizenship, right? It's sort of like neither here nor there. We are like never going to be monogamous in our citizenship claims, right? We're too promiscuous because we're like waving the Puerto Rican flag and, something else. Or we're waving the Mexican flag and this. So I wanted to get at how that feels like the way we do citizenship.
Yeah. And it was very particular. You really did that. Also, another one of my obsessions with how you move from one chapter to the next. This Diva Moves, which is very much about West Side Story and the triumph of Anita and of Rita. This ends with your Anita remains both of and apart from West Side Story. Singularly plural, which is nice, insisting, like many of us brown folks, on being, quote, queer for Uncle Sam, on creating a space of belonging and difference. Ni de aquí, ni de allá. A no, and that's in parens, a no place for us. I so appreciated the way you carried that into the opening of the Tina Turner chapter. Back when Tina was Annie Mae Bullock, so it starts with the name change, and attending summer high school in St. Louis, Missouri, she would regularly cross the Mississippi River to hear live music at nightclubs in East St. Louis, Illinois. Crossing the river meant crossing state lines and states of mind. It meant crossing towards the beginnings of her life as Tina Turner, which is where she first met Ike and the Kings of Rhythm. You get at something fascinating. Aside from that, yes, she's neither nor, no place and no place. But you also use the obsessive repetition of her story, of the melodrama, of her abuse by Ike, her escape from Ike, even once she had wholly created this new star persona, it was always coming back. And finally, she had to write a book and got a movie. But you use the expression having the Tina, you say Tina had to get out of her story. She had to get herself out of that story. And you compare your father, who wasn't able to do that. But I thought it was a wonderful way to talk about how any kind of artist has to contend with their story, their material.
Yeah, so much of what, reckoning with divas, you often reckon with the idea of the comeback, right? Divas are very much known for having a comeback, right? They endure struggle, they, have their low points, and then they come back, and it's, always a story of triumph. And certainly Tina Turner's life has been absolutely, right, channeled through that, and in some ways certainly fits it.
But I was very struck by the HBO documentary about her, wherein you really see the effects, the really like traumatic effects that having to retell the story about her and Ike later in her career, really the toll it took, and the actual like clinical PTSD that it caused.
And her really saying at certain points, I
Like,
don't
I don't
like
wanna
to
tell the
talk
story
about it
anymore.
It's also one reason she said, I'm not singing blues and
Yeah,
rhythm and
that's
blues
right.
anymore.
That's right.
It's not my life.
I was very struck by that when I was sort of doing my research. And, you know, as someone who's the daughter of, and this is where the poetry stuff comes in, as daughter of a Vietnam vet, I saw very similarly that kind of story of there are some things you don't come back from. And what happens if we talk about Tina as absolutely someone who shows us how to come back, but also very much recognizing there's things I'm not going to come back from, right? I think that putting those two stories together helps facilitate, you know, one or the other. And there's someone who's work with traumatized war veterans, and he says, you know, first you have to get the story out of yourself, and then you have to get yourself out of the story.
Exactly.
And you know, nobody allowed, like, there was no place that was allowing her to get herself out of the story, even as she was trying. Like, they kept wanting to talk about Ike. You know, she's like selling out the stadiums in Brazil, right? She's completely beyond, you know, successful in the 80s and 90s, and there wasn't a way for her to get out of that story. And I wanted to kind of mark that, you know, the damage that was doing to her, and the way that, like a war veteran, like my father, they don't always get allowed that space or that opportunity.
Though she kept finding and getting offered ways to at least temporarily.
Right, because she says, you know, there's a great line when she says, you know, Tina Turner, like the private dancer, like that wasn't my comeback. That was me. That was Tina appearing for the first time, you know, which I think is a wonderful way to think about that arrival, right? And the fact that she was able to do that, you know, and, you know, she was in her, you know, she was middle-aged, right? You know,
Totally.
so divas also allow us to kind of, the opportunity to really honor and reckon with women of a certain age that often are either invisibilized or pathologized in some ways. And here she is at the top of her game at that point in her life.
And having to prove it.
Yeah. And this is, I think that one of my favorite moments of my book, I think, in terms of as a writer, was the last paragraph of that chapter, because I think even as I'm trying to reckon with this, I'm trying to do through the writing, allow imaginatively how I describe a kind of an imaginative way for them to escape the story, you know. So even as the facts don't allow it, but maybe sometimes through the writing we can create a scene that maybe allows for some gesture toward that.
Do you mean the paragraph about your father?
It's where, I changed in the middle of the paragraph. It kind of goes between them.
All right, here we go. May I?
Sure,
Since it's one of the
sure.
favorite parts. Oh no, you should.
One of my
read it.
times. I could if you want. But it says, in his 70s, my father will lose much of his hearing, and because I talk a lot in the chapter about him listening to his reel-to-reel on his headphones, and so nobody could really listen in with him, right, to Tina Turner, listening to Tina Turner. I'm not sure if this is a mercy or a curse. The story I tell is the story around his silence, which is, of course, not his story. He listened so hard for so long. As evening sets, he turns off his hearing aid, tunes it all out, sleeps soundly in the silence. In their final scene together, Auntie Entity, this is in Mad Max, laughs triumphantly as she stands over Max, sparing his life. Ain't we a pair, Raggedy Man? She turns her back on him and laughs again. Goodbye, soldier, she says, before riding off into the desert sunset. Sand clouds lift and blur the screen in the wake of her departure. She speeds away, out of the story. So I wanted to, you know, it was really great, just fun to be able to talk about her in Mad Max, because she's just, you know, a badass. But also, you know, looking at that final image on the screen, I wanted to kind of have that.
And you actually have her reclaiming the classic Western.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
She's John Wayne.
She is John Wayne riding into the
too.
sunset,
That's right.
totally in that cloud of smoke. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I think we should probably open for questions very soon. I just want to make
Sure.
one more. When you are really immersed in, involved in, charged by your material, it seems to always be gesturing out to things that haven't yet happened while you're writing it, but will suddenly become, oh my God, she was predicting this. And one charming example of that is in your Celia Cruz La India chapter, where La India was mentored by her, or and adored her and was mentored by her. They sing together. They're on stage. They had recorded a song together, and at the end of it, La India, younger, the new diva in town, kneels before Celia, and I thought, oh my God, Olympics, Simone Biles and Jordan Childs winning silver and bronze to the glorious Black Brazilian gymnast Rebecca Andrade, and creating a lot of stink among American gymcrack patriots because they had bowed to her. And I thought, oh my God, what a gorgeous, Simone Biles, we don't think of her as a diva, but she is the greatest of all time. And Jordan, we hope she'll get her medal back. We want it. But what a glorious thing. And exactly a diva. Diva homage to a diva whose skill has made them generous and loving.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something often pedagogical. I mean, all you have to do is like watch RuPaul's Drag Race to understand divas and pedagogy, right? But also there is something about divas and and succession, right? So sometimes it is all about Eve and it's about the thread of succession,
absolutely.
right? But sometimes it's not, right? And especially if we look to these two women, that there is a kind of mentoring, Harlem drag ball culture, La India and Celia. And that was a really important thing for me to see, right, as a graduate student, kind of entering and being disciplined into a world that was very much about there's a token and anybody else who's of color who comes around is a threat, right, because there's so few of us. And it was like, no, fuck that. No. Like, we have to look to other models to not believe that.
And Lauryn Hill and Aretha.
Yeah, and Lauryn Hill and Aretha in the 90s chapter.
But yeah. And they enjoyed doing it. And people, as did La India.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Celia says, right.
And she's like, get up. Like, levántate, like, get up. Enough of that. We got work to do.
Exactly. All right, I think now we will open for questions. Yes, because it's a little after 7:30. There are, the lights have risen. There are microphones coming around. So indulge yourself. Got it? You got it?
3 questions. Anita in West Side Story was played by Chita Rivera on stage. How do the 2 performances compare?
I mean, Chita Rivera was extraordinary, right? And really, the only reason I don't write about that performance is archive, right? There, I wasn't able to access it with the same kind of intensity and that I could the film, and because the film had a particular role in my upbringing, watching it over and over again with my mother, but her skill at it, right? I mean, Rita Moreno was simply, in many ways, trying to emulate the extraordinary skill as a dancer that Chita displayed in that and many other musicals after that. So I think that in terms of style, Chita was, I think, probably more classically trained, and so there may have been a different approach to Jerome Robinson's choreography, which is very ballet-based. So she may have, from what I've seen, kind of been able to just adhere more to that particular training. Her body and the way that it moved was probably conditioned in that kind of training. But there's no question that she was extraordinary as Anita, and that's why she, got the accolade she did, and that was the kind of bar that Rita, undeniably talks about, had to kind of meet.
Second question, didn't Aretha dazzle an audience by singing opera?
She did. I talk about that at the Grammys after Luciano Pavarotti had to.
He was sick.
He was sick or something, and so she's told that very night, and it's not even in her key, and she does it, right? So I think that was an extraordinary moment and happened in 97. I can't remember what year in the 90s. Absolutely. But she does.
Yes.
She does.
And third question, didn't Tina Turner achieve a spiritual transcendence by singing the Beatles song Help all over the world?
I mean, I don't actually know about that.
Nor
I
do
know
I.
that she has a very different, a
myself
particular
on-
relationship to spiritual
I have it on my cell phone,
transcendence.
I'll show it to you afterwards.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, she has her own relationship to spiritual transcendence off stage as well.
Yes,
certainly.
exactly, through her Buddhism. Yeah.
Yes. Hi.
Hello. My question has to do with the term diva itself.
Sure.
It's noted in the program how it's like a loaded, charged term. So I was just wondering your choice to unapologetically use that word within the book.
Absolutely. I talk a lot in the book about the term, right? And how over the course of my lifetime, which is 50 plus years, we've seen, a real a change, right, in the valences that term has, right? And a term that began in some ways as a term that's reserved for, opera divas, right? Usually white opera divas singing opera, then became more applied more widely to popular, women in the popular sphere. But I was very interested in thinking about the term as well in the ways that it racializes, does racializing work, so that on the one hand, it was often used to exclude women of color, right? And to sort of mark racial white ideas around whiteness and glamour. On the other hand, it was also used simultaneously, certainly in the course of my lifetime, as a way to deride mostly black women, right? Oh, that woman's a diva because she's making too many demands, because she's too loud, right? So it was a way to mark black, to reify, racist ideas of blackness. And I wanted to kind of chart that. And then it also then suddenly becomes a brand. And then it becomes a way to condition girls into being like successful girls, right, in the early 2000s. So the term I was interested in, I do that throughout the book and kind of marking its journey. But one thing I did want to reclaim, very much so, that I think often falls out, is this attention to virtuosity. Women in the book, so my divas are women who are not only almost superhumanly virtuosic, but unapologetic about it, right? And I think that that's often what a diva does, right? She's extraordinarily good at whatever she does. She's not coy or demure or, trying to hide that. This is why the Williams sisters were vilified, right? And so that was something for me that stays constant in the book. And again, as I said before, even as she's singular, there's the reason I try to call the audience in, or the readers in very early on, like listen with me, is because throughout I want to show not only the relationships, right, I have with the people that I've had with divas as the kind of like triangulated figure in the room, but also wanting to establish that with the readers, like what kind of relation might we forge in the discussion of the diva. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So I was thinking a lot about, the virtue of diva, or like the performance and like how you need to be perfect. I was thinking a lot about Whitney Houston and kind of how, I find it very interesting that you are talking about diva and death and like the imperfections and the scatological, when my thought is someone like Whitney who had to like hide queerness, for example.
Who had to what?
Hide queerness, like
Yes,
hide her
absolutely.
queerness,
Sure.
or dealing with addiction, like how a lot of this this need, like being reified, deified, often like you can't show all the human parts of you. And so I guess I just was curious about your thoughts on that. And I guess also like the last part is, are there divas who don't like the term, like they're like, I want to be human sometimes,
Yeah. I don't know that there's divas who don't like, Grace Jones is like, don't call me a diva. Like I'm so, she's so beyond being a diva, which I agree. So some don't want the term but for many reasons. But I think you're absolutely right, that often there are some figures, I think Whitney Houston's a great example, right, that sort of the pressure around perfection ends up becoming part of that star text, right, and becomes part of the tragedy, because divas are often affiliated, right, with death and the tragic narrative, and so that very much plays out, right, with a figure like Whitney. I remember doing a panel once years ago. I think it was a panel on Beyonce, way pre-Lemonade days, and there was a sort of a back and forth on the panel and among the audience of like, you're either like somebody who loves Beyonce, which is like the perfect, like no seams show, like everything is like in place, or you're like, you love Mariah, where it's all a mess, and so people were talking about like, what does it mean to kind of, be, what does it say about you, given the kind of diva that you love, right? And I think that I don't write about Whitney in this book, but I think that often it can show us the particular pressures that are put on women, and particularly women who are sort of beloved for the kind of normative values that they put forward, right? Which was part of Whitney's appeal, unfortunately, and so then it became the very sort of image became the prison, right? Which was heartbreaking, yeah. I think there's one up there.
Hi.
Hi.
I heard you talk a lot about like these extraordinary divas who very much live in the limelight, but I know you also spoke a little bit about your aunt.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, how do you kind of conceptualize the everyday diva who exists outside of the spotlight, and how do you interact with her?
Absolutely, it's a great question. It was very important for me to include people like my aunt, right, who were models for us, many of us, us meaning like for me, a woman of color, who live their life in, that so that the everyday is turned into an event, right, or that the everyday is somehow managed by bringing to it a sense of outrageous style, right, or living larger than life. And I wanted to mark that because, in part also because, especially during the 90s when there was a lot of anxiety around diva being democratized, like, oh, everybody can be a diva now. And, oh, there was sort of like those that would police those boundaries were very anxious and upset about that. But I wanted to sort of say, hey, look, actually, you don't need to be famous to be a diva. You are, there are plenty of, aunties, there are plenty of, folks who came out of the drag ball culture who were never famous, right? I was just reading the biography of Candy Darling, right? There was, although she did become famous, but I think that there's models all around us, right? Of, in this case, women or trans folks who live in ways often at great risk that, again, it sort of to manage the horrors of the daily or the quotidian, right? Find a way to make something grand in the midst of that. And that is the coping. I wanted to honor the kind of coping strategies. I wanted to honor the creative force that was. And to me, that's what a diva would look, would look like. And so I talk about, even Jemima Jones, who's a performance artist who's not super famous, right? But an alter ego of a performer named Daniel Alexander Jones. I think those figures very much provide that kind of model or way of living, right, amidst the daily horrors. Yeah.
And often provided that kind of model for the divas that whose names we now know.
Absolutely, yeah. Here and there.
Hello.
Hi.
So I'm really excited because like several of my students are here and we read your essay that was published in the Georgia Review, and they've written essays on it. So
Thank you.
I'm very excited. I have a bit of like a broad question because of that. I just would like to hear you, and both of you can also talk about this. What is it like? What is the experience like? What is the process? And you mentioned the archives, to write about pop culture when you are like an intellectual, an academic, a researcher, all of the above. Because I think sometimes we struggle with like feeling a bit silly, but it's not silly at all. Right?
Not at all.
And the reworking of the definition of diva, right, is so important, and these conversations are important to intellectualize. So if you guys could talk about that.
Sure. I mean, I was fortunate that, I wrote a dissertation about Selena, right, in the 90s, which was,
not exactly something not all dissertation advisors would allow one to do. But I was very fortunate that I was trained by Black feminists, right, who who encouraged me and taught me how to think critically about popular culture, right? Because popular culture, like any, like a novel or like a historical treatise, right, is a complex semiotic code that can be decoded, right? I mean, and I think that there are plenty of wonderful scholars out there doing that kind of work. I was just teaching an article by Richard Dyer, a wonderful film scholar who's written really beautifully about race and film. So there's plenty of models out there. And I think that, but understanding that to do it well, right, means, you have to be, it's just like a scientist, right? It requires, like the scientific method, like tremendous observation. And this is where my skills as a poet, I think, really helped me. How to learn how to dwell in 5 minutes of a piece, in one dance move or one gesture even, right? And to learn to, like, if I stick with it long enough, right, illumination will come. And I think that's something that I always try to teach my students. Like, you really, even if you don't understand what it means, even if you don't know what to call, that you don't know that it's called a paso doble, or you don't know that it's called a, twerking, whatever it is, right? But how, being able to attend very closely before you even go to the theory is one thing that I really, really just recommend. And it doesn't mean, and I always have students say, oh, but then aren't you going to, like, hate, the stuff that you used to love? And I'm like, no, you just have a more robust, complicated relationship to it. Like, that's popular culture,
You may need a little break from it.
Yes, you may need a break. Absolutely.
I would only say, building exactly on what Deb said, that watching and listening and playing it over and over and over, finding, and that will help you find the language for it. Because I think sometimes it can feel or seem a little silly when one is using, full tilt, a very, sternly theoretical language, and that can make one feel a little because you have to find words that will keep hold of and will render the spontaneity, the surprise, the sudden jolts, as a body moves unexpectedly. But that comes from watching and listening and playing over and over.
I talk about Angela Davis, right, listening over and over and over again to those blues songs when she's to theorize Black feminism, right? Like, she talks about, like, she keeps lifting the needle, because of course it was LPs back then.
We had those
over
records,
and over, right? Like, that there's in the dwelling, like, she then brings us a whole theory of Black feminism. Or I tell, and this is one way where poetry and performance analysis come together. One of the best things I've read of performance analysis is Ross Gay's Beholding. I mean, he actually writes in the poem about a book-length poem about this teeny tiny moment, right? That, of just like the approach of of Dr. J, right? To the basket. And it's just like a whole book of it, but it's because he says, like, how many thousands of times did I replay it to then be able to dwell inside that. So that's what I would
And
encourage.
that's our way as writers of doing what these performers are doing. Yeah. They are working. They're repeating the synecdoche you talk about, where the single gesture summons up the great artist. You know how long that gesture has been worked on?
Absolutely.
And every teeny little bit of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there was somebody else had a question.
Hi, I actually have a question about when you talked about Rita Moreno and her body as a diva. I want to know more about the relationship to the body as divas grow older. You talked about Aretha Franklin. When she was younger, she obviously looks different when she's older. How does that relationship change, if it does change at all?
Absolutely, it changes. And I think part of what's exciting to me as someone who's not so young anymore about divas is that divas often come into their prime later in life, right? I mean, that's part of what they earn the role. I mean, we talk about teen divas and all of that, and certainly we can, but that there's something about the accumulation of all of those years of the kind of, practicing the scales, so to speak, right? that one gets at 50 that one didn't have at 20, right? And so they teach us about a different relationship to time and the body that often capitalism wants us to be fixed in, right? Which is super ageist and misogynist. So that they teach us about like, oh, it takes that long to get to that point, but also, and anybody who watched the Olympics and watched Celine Dion perform, it also is always the threat of failure because we understand the body is so vulnerable, right? Her body, which has been deeply compromised, right, by her illness. And so to see her, like we are on the edge of our seats because we're like, is she going to hit the notes? Is she going to hit the notes? And that also, with the threat of failure, the shadow of failure is always there. And sometimes they do fail, right? And you love them because they're vulnerable and still trying in public to do all this. So I think that's kind of how that it gets us to reckon with the body and its limits and the way that they sometimes are often exceeded, I think.
I would also say it's interesting for a diva to figure out how, let us say, the body, it's not going to kick as high. How a lower kick or a slightly differently timed kick can have a powerful effect that wasn't what you needed years ago. I would say look at some footage of Tina Turner and Beyonce performing together.
Yeah.
Tina starts by being in pedal pushers, bless her heart, though the legs are so gorgeous. But you see her adapting both to her old self and to the Beyonce who is partly imitating the old Tina.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Know how you chose because there's people like Dinah Washington,
Absolutely.
Eartha Kitt,
Yeah. Oh my
Betty
gosh.
Davis, the singer.
Betty Davis is amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
There's so many that you could do another couple books.
I could, absolutely. It was actually heartbreaking, right, to narrow down. Part of how I chose was because it's a memoir and it's criticism. It needed to have a narrative arc, so I sort of was picking these moments in my life, and then what divas kind of worked with that, or what particular ideas about divas I wanted to talk about, whether it was style or coming back, and that often determined. But it meant that just as many divas were included were cut. Like I have whole chapters that didn't appear. I have a chapter on Nina Simone that didn't make it, which was heartbreaking. Lena Horne, the production of Color Purple with Cynthia Erivo and Heather Headley. Like there's so much that didn't end up going in just because narratively the book had to cohere. Betty Davis is incredible. And Eartha Kitt also, wow, holy cow. So I think that it is idiosyncratic, but it's also about how do you make the book, act as a book. I knew I wanted to end with LaBelle because LaBelle also really challenged the idea of there's only ever room for one diva on the stage, and there's like 3 tremendously talented women who also transport us. And I wanted to talk about the pandemic and how they helped me get through that. And so I think that's how the story kind of had to take over, and that meant things went away, but not because of anything else. Not because of lack of love. Yeah.
I think we should take, and happily can take, maybe one more question. Deb is going to sign a book.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, 2 more questions. Okay.
I'll be quick. Hi, I'm Jordan.
Hi.
I'm so excited to be here. I've heard amazing things
Jordan.
about your class. So sad I haven't been able to take it. But my question, I would just love to hear you talk about your research process. Like, where do you start? How do you decide where to start? What sources were most interesting to you? Or if you came across any unexpected gems, did you conduct interviews? I would just love to do performance research one day. So just want to pick your brain.
Absolutely. So all of those things happen. When I did the Selena book, I did a lot of interviews. I did a lot of hanging out in the lobby at the Selena musical and getting to know the guy who was selling the stuff. And then it ended up his daughter was like a Selena performer. Ethnographic and interviews certainly has happened. A lot of it is close readings of the performances themselves, right? So watching, going to the Color Purple, spending a lot of my research money on going to Broadway so many times to see the performance or to see different people perform. Shug Avery, for example. So some of that was just being with the performances. so if it's filmed, if it's videoed, right? I think that a lot of times my research would start with the question, sort of like I asked earlier, like, oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to like West Side Story. Why do I watch it all the time with my mom and love it? And so sometimes it comes out of a question like that, right? And thinking and telling yourself, like, there isn't a question that is too insignificant in some ways. Like, often it is the thing that you really don't know the answer to that can guide you into the bigger ideas, right? Selena, with the Selena book, it was all about, like, I grew up Tejana, like Selena, and I was in Chicago when she died. I was going to grad school there, and among other Latinos, I noticed she was also quite popular. And I knew as a Tejana, like, Tejanos are not cool in the Latina kind of pantheon. Like, Tejanos are not seen as cool. So I'm like, why does everybody love a Tejana? Like, that's unusual. How did Selena become so popular? Not just among the world, but like even just among Latinos, right? And that became a kind of way by which I then began to understand how the memorializations of her were really about Latina communities kind of trying to assemble themselves through a kind of public grief practices, right? And so that's often how it starts.
Hi, Professor Paredez. My name is Anyang. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk or ask you a question about the idea of the lifespan mortality of a diva, and thinking about the opposite, which I think of as like the Miss America, like pristine, perfect. Like, she draws admiration because of how like plain and mediocre she is.
Yes.
And so
yes.
like I wanted to know, like, how does the idea of a Miss America like complicate, expand, or like give more life to the diva, who is like the quintessential opposite of that?
It's a great question. So, people often ask me, like, well, what's the difference between a diva and just an icon or a star? And I often, or some other woman who's like, a great performer. And I often talk about, like, the thing about divas, they often have a relationship to non-normativity, right? That they are often non-normative in some way. They kind of blur the boundaries of sexuality or of gender, or they're, outrageous in ways that seem threatening. And so sometimes I think when we think about Miss America, right, which is sort of the icon of a kind of normative, values around conventional, even, often in line with white ideas around whiteness, although not always. That means I would say that, like, in some ways she buttresses, like, then, or the diva kind of would serve to always be in tension with a kind of Miss America figure, even a political figure, right? People often ask me, well, what about, Kamala, or what about, and I'm like, especially in light of Brat Summer. And I'm like, I think it's really interesting, right? And I also think that politicians by definition have to follow a deeply normative, right? They have to make themselves look even more normative than they may actually be, right? And so, like, my favorite moment of Kamala's was when, they ask her, what's her favorite curse word? Have you seen, isn't that great? And she's like, it starts with an M and it ends with an not an which is to me like the blackest thing she's ever done. I love that. But in general, there's a kind of having to make that figure much more normative, where the diva doesn't necessarily play by those rules. And so I think that's how they work in relation to each other.
I think these days.
Thank you for staying for so long. Thank you.